Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective. Good evening. Welcome to Perspectives On. I'm Aly Roland, your host. Boy, I tell you, there has been a lot going on in the past 3 to 4 weeks in the news. This country is battling everything from unemployment in the wake of the pandemic to the crisis on the education landscape in the wake of the pandemic. We're dealing with issues revolving around police brutality, all related to the pandemic and the riots and the demonstrations that are going on, not just in Georgia, but all over the country. We've also had some issues to happen we've also had some issues to happen in the realm of farming and the food justice. And so there's a lot of things going on tonight. So for this next hour, Perspectives On will have what we're branding the Women's Laboratory. In this Women's Laboratory, we're going to talk about various issues and give our perspective on how these impacts will affect the various places within the realms of community, as well as those that will impact women in particular. And so what I've done is I've invited a panel of some dynamic women who are they come from a variety of diverse areas within the community, and each one have a perspective, whether it's from education, whether it's mentoring young women, whether it's just being a young mother. We also have a perspective coming from that which is not necessarily African American, which I value. If you know me and if you have visited our website, you know that Perspectives On is all about diversity. And so I'm going to let these individuals introduce themselves. Reverend Lewis, I will start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you bring to this panel tonight, Reverend Lewis?
Good evening, and thank you for another invitation to join your Perspectives On conversation. I am Andrea Lewis. I am the founder of Virtuous Pearl Interdenominational Women's Ministry, where we study God's Word through the eyes and experiences of women. I am also a professor of education at Spelman College, and it's great to be with each of you this evening.
Awesome. Okay, and let's see. Reverend Sutton, would you like to go next? Why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you bring to this panel tonight?
Great day, everybody. I am Hope Sims Sutton. I am the founder of She is Powerful Incorporated, and we simply believe in the genius of women and girls to powerfully change the world. And so I am a coach, I'm a consultant, I'm an ordained minister in the Lord's Church, and I am very excited to be here on tonight.
Awesome. Reverend Powers, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. And once again, I am so excited to participate in Perspectives On. I am the Reverend Esther Powers, the senior pastor of Mount Zion AME Church in College Park, Georgia, on Riverdale Road. Also, I am a mentor. I am a person who believes in empowering others to make a difference. And so I'm just excited to be here tonight and share in these interesting and rich conversations.
Awesome. Okay, Reverend Shelton, are you there? Can you hear us?
I can.
Awesome. Introduce yourself and just tell us what you bring to this ministry.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. I'm Reverend Kim Shelton, the senior pastor of Good News Community Church in Chicago, Illinois. I am also an early childhood educator and manager for National Louis University in Chicago as well. So I come bringing just my understanding and expertise in how do we understand racial injustices? How do we understand equity and equality and injustices. As you know, I just mentioned I'm coming out of Chicago, and violence is almost everyday life here. And so we are on the front line trying to combat it community by community.
Awesome. Wow. I see you all the way black. All the way black. That's all right. I ain't mad at you. All the way black. Reverend Wholeness Roland. I have a hard time with that. I'm trying to get used to that. Wholeness Roland.
Just do it slow.
Introduce yourself. Yeah. Got to. Tell us about yourself.
So this is my 12th year ministry. I am a youth pastor and an assistant pastor in Washington, D.C., as well as in Atlanta, Georgia. I am also a spiritual care provider and chaplain. And a mother.
Awesome. I see we have a little, yes, two beautiful little babies. I see we have a bit of a delay here. Okay. All right. And last but not least, I want my very impressive special correspondent, Angela. I will let you introduce yourself and talk about what you bring to tonight, Angela.
Thank you for having me. My name is Angela Ly. I was a 5th grade teacher back in Austin for 4 years. So I worked with a very diverse group of students, and I taught nearly 400 kids while I was there. So I'm coming from that background as an educator, but also from being a student, also from parents who immigrated here from to America. So talking about my experience as an Asian American and trying to keep those cultural roots. So embracing that while still embracing being an American too.
All right. Well, we'll get right into our discussion. Did I get everybody? Yes. Okay. So we'll get right into our discussion, and to top it off, I like what I think Reverend Shelton, you really did kind of hit home on what our very first topic, and that's that topic about driving while Black. Now, most recently, and we'll have that video in just a second, but most recently, ABC News produced just a little bit of information. I guess they did some research on the occurrence of African American males being stopped by police, and some very alarming statistics about what's going on with our African American males. Angela, if you want to go ahead and share that screen, we'll share that just to kind of give a little bit of context just for that. We're ready when you are, Angela. Now, we don't have the audio.
Sorry about that. Okay, let me try again.
Okay.
Now, at this defining moment in America, with so much on the line, from ABC News, My America, Your America, Our America, this is Turning Point. Tonight, driving while Black. Pulled over 5 times more than white drivers in some cities.
Driver looks more like one of our suspects because of the white set nose.
Philando Castillo stopped 52 times before he was killed behind the wheel. Now his family speaking out, demanding change.
Does it offend you
Says he was pulled over that many times?
Yes, it does, because it definitely means he was profiled. Plus, why one doctor wears scrubs every day, everywhere. How his uniform shields him from suspicions on the streets and may have saved his life. Now reporting, Pierre Thomas.
There is not a moment that goes by when police are riding behind me where I don't fear being pulled over.
When you're driving down the street, you know, and those blue and red cherries come on behind you, you all of a sudden get a tingle. Your heart starts to race, even when you know you've done nothing. I will light you up. Get out.
Wow.
Now.
Wow.
Get out of the car.
For a failure to signal.
Adrenaline pumping, pulse quickening. A routine traffic stop makes most of us anxious. But for too many Black Americans, such routine encounters with police can also mean the difference between life and death. Walter Scott, Samuel DuBose, Philando Castile. For a number of those whose loved ones have been killed, the fear and anger at police is wrong. And for some, those sworn to protect are instead viewed as oppressors.
They are here to assassinate us. They are here to kill us because we are Black.
My nephew Philando was murdered by a St. Anthony police officer in Falcon Heights, Minnesota. Seeing my sister's son, my nephew, shot and killed in a car by another police officer. You know, it was devastating.
Philando Castile's life was cut short on July 6, 2016. He was 32 years old. On that fateful night, Officer Geronimo Yanez made the call to pull over Castile.
So we've seen this is not something new. This has been an occurrence that has a story that has been told many times. But what I want to get the perspective from the panel in terms of how these things at this point, we're 4 months, I think, after the pandemic came into play on our communities. How are these occurrences now impacting African American males from your perspective, and what are the long-term effects from your perspectives? Anybody can start.
We were talking about this last night at the dinner table, actually. I have a 14-year-old son, and he will be 15 in about 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And we were discussing him wanting to get his learner's permit. And my mother asked him, what would he do if, when he was driving, he was pulled over by the police? And, you know, for me and for the rest of us, when we first started driving, our parents' concern was a car accident and us wrecking the car and hurting ourselves. And now it's compounded, whereas a mother of 2 Black boys, I'm thinking about them going out driving, and my fear is them being pulled over by a police officer and being harmed. I know that my first thought should probably be them getting into an accident, but for me, it is them being pulled over by the police and just being scared. And even as a woman of faith, knowing that God has everything in control and we can rely and trust on God, I still have that fear of sending my son out on the road by himself eventually. And, you know, I think that it's difficult to watch the news and hear of these young men who are being pulled over, arrested, thrown on the ground, shot, killed because of their skin color. And I really don't know where we go in this country to help solve the problem and what we do, because it seems like every week there's a new incident of police brutality and targeting Black men especially, but also women as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're still trying to make sense out of what happened to Breonna Taylor. Does anybody else have anything that they want to offer about that?
Dr. Lewis, I wanted to chime in based on what you were saying, it is very hard. It's very challenging to just exist in a society that allows this. But I think that the reality is that this is not new, you know. So whether we are fearful of it now, I've seen videos from the 60s, 40s, 70s that were all speaking about this as an issue. And I think the thing that's so troubling for me as a woman is that I hear a lot of folks talking about the men, but you're absolutely correct, Dr. White. Women are being impacted too. You know, we look around and Breonna Taylor's killers still haven't been charged in any way. Right. And so I think it's such a challenging perspective for me, because when I was pregnant in Atlanta, Georgia with my son, who's now 3, my husband and I were stopped. I ended up arrested and in the back of a police vehicle, and I was not at fault at all. And so to know that that was my experience, and, you know, the officer literally accused me of lying that I was pregnant, called EMS, you know, knowing that all of this happened, I was coming from work, we were heading to a doctor's appointment and lunch, that's how it could, you know, the trajectory of, we had only come a block. And so to know that that could have occurred to us, it just, to me, lets me know that male, female, it doesn't matter. They're just attacking Black bodies at alarming rates. And I think it's very tragic, because God is real, but Satan is too, you know, so yeah.
Dr. White, you know, it's interesting because I'm probably the senior member of the group. And it's interesting because so much has changed, but so much has not changed. My mother was a civil rights activist in Alabama, and I remember her being very bold, I felt, as a young person, but she would not pull over for the police. She wouldn't speed, but they had to follow her all the way home to her house. And she said, never stop, let them follow you home. And so it's just interesting that we still have this embedded fear of law enforcement that still now exists almost 50 years later. I have a grandson. I always considered myself very fortunate, even though I wanted a son, that I had 2 daughters, that I did not have to worry with some of the things that were going on when they were growing up. But, you know, as Dr. Roland said, you know, women are not immune. I mean, also look at Sandra Bland. Let's not forget her. But I think also from my perspective is like, we also now, even though it should not need to be done, but we also have to educate or teach our kids how to survive the moment. You know, I was raised up by, my mother would tell me, when confrontation gets to a certain point, remember, you want to live to fight another day. And not saying that it will always work, but it's almost like we have to come up with defensive tactics or offensive tactics, because clearly we're in a war, and we're, in many ways, we're losing the war. So what do we change to, you know, that's within our control? And so it is very sad. It is very frustrating. It's very exhausting that we are still going through this and talking about this even right now.
And I like what you said about, you know, really teaching our kids to know how to survive that moment. Because in talking to a lot of mothers, especially mothers of young boys, you know, it's about, you know, when this happens to you, your reaction to this happening to you will be the difference between you getting out of that situation and you not getting out of that situation. So we'd rather see you put that cigarette out, if you know where I'm coming from with that. We'd rather see you just get out of the car, or, you know, or whatever the request is, so that you can live to fight another day. You know, and that's just my perspective. Anybody else want to?
So I wanted to chime in because we have this thing called the talk, right? And so we got to start having the talk with young adults, whether it be our young boys or our young girls. And there's been a couple of churches, even here in Chicago, having the talk and community with our young adults, our children. So if they're ever pulled aside, what to do, right? These are your rights. And we made little cards for them to carry with them. These are phone numbers you need to have. These are your rights you need to have. And so there have been some larger churches that have been sharing this information that I also brought over to my congregation of what to do when you get pulled over, like ABC, the steps. And so to have this thing called the talk, right, with our children. I don't know too many nationalities that are having the talk, this talk with their children. They're having other talks, economic empowerment and all that kind of stuff. But we're having to talk to stay alive if pulled over. So what kind of psychological, sociological piece is that? That we got to turn around to our children, even young children, because we had a 12-year-old, right, shot, we're playing with a BB gun, to tell them about the talk.
You're absolutely
But I
right.
think too, when you're talking about the talk, right, that just watching that video, for me, I don't have a son, so that's a point of my transparency. But I mean, just think about the tertiary trauma, right? That third level trauma. I wasn't there on site, I didn't know the person, but I felt some kind of way as soon as I saw the sirens, as soon as I see the flashing lights. It's something, or hear the siren rather, it's just something about that innate fear. I think someone said that before, right? There's just something, this trepidation that hits our bodies when it's us being pulled over. And of course, I've been stopped before by police, but I think it's just one of those areas where we see it happening. Maybe up close. It wasn't my story up close to that degree, but I just think for me, the psychological impact that it does have on people of color is something that we can't dismiss so easily. Even if we come out of it, save another day to tell the story. But I mean, just watching it evokes something in me, right? This kind of terror, even if it's not even happening to me in this moment. So I do think that the psychological warfare that it presents to us is something that we also need to talk about, that exists, at least for me, without having had to be in that situation with a law enforcement officer. But I have worked, and been trained in law enforcement in another part of my life, and so I get some of the adrenaline. But I also know for certain that there are pockets of people who wear the badge who do so for the sake of intimidation, right? And so I think we can't not have that conversation either. Doing the due diligence of checking officers and making certain that we are not just giving them slaps on the wrist when they are reported for just being so far away from, doing their duties. And the profiling, we know it absolutely exists. And so I think that while driving while Black is a real issue, I also think systemically there is something to be said about those who do join these areas of law enforcement for that intimidation factor to want to be corrupt, because generally there's nothing much that happens to them.
Right. And I like what you said. I like what you're saying about having that conversation about the psychological impacts, because and there's an impact on that I see happening on both sides. Earlier in the summer, we had a show, a women's laboratory, where we just talked about what's going on with Black men, and the whole focus for that entire hour was about how is this affecting our Black men psychologically. And when I look at the history of African Americans in this country, and I see how our relationship, when I say our, I mean African Americans, has evolved. Some would say in a positive way, some would say in a negative way. Our relationship with this country, this government, has evolved over the years. I see that there is that while the trend for African American women has somewhat, I don't know, leveled off, I see that it has declined when it came to the Black man. And so there's a psychological impact on the African American male, especially when we talk about how that African American male relates to his family. That's probably a whole nother show, but I like what you said about that, Reverend Sutton. And something else, I like Reverend Shelton. You hit on what is the church's response to all of this, and that's, I like that in Chicago you guys are having a conversation about, what do you do if you're stopped by the police, and maybe and especially the African American church, maybe we can do a little bit more of that, and that's especially when we're talking about civil disobedience and teaching about what civil disobedience is. Angela, was there something that you wanted to offer to the conversation?
I did. So going off of what Reverend Shelton and Reverend Sutton was mentioning, what I'm uncomfortable with is when people want to dismiss that narrative that young Black men are being targeted. And that is happening with the community. And I wish that there was more broadcasts and those types of segments out there for the public to be more informed about it, because I'm still hearing people, just passing by or out in public, still talking about how those numbers are skewed, and it's really not. And I think it's really important for more people to acknowledge that they are a population of people. They are people that are being targeted. And it breaks my heart to know that people are still trying to dismiss statistics that we just saw in ABC News too.
Right. Absolutely.
I think one of the challenges for the African American community and the church is to realize that those statistics represent us. We have built this ancillary structure in which even some of us as people of color feel, it didn't really happen in my neighborhood. It really didn't happen to people who look like me and people that I talk to, because we have arrived at a certain station in life. We have reached a certain level. And so we don't have those difficult conversations. We don't want to acknowledge it because we want to fool ourselves that we have gone beyond that. So we don't, people get uncomfortable when we talk about it in certain churches because we are the high cotton or whatever you want to call it church. And, those type of people don't belong to our church. We do outreach to them, and then that's all we do. And it's unfortunate because I think a lot of what is going on, we bear some of the blame for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It may be ancillary, but, we stopped doing what the Black church has always done, right, which is care for each other and provide for each other and advocate for each other, regardless of your station in life. And it just infuriates me when, I look and I was like, okay, let me do a check. Am I talking to another person of color? Or I'm talking to a person who really doesn't realize that you could be that person too. It doesn't matter that you drive a nice car or anything like that.
But I think
and
you're
it's
talking
unfortunate.
about classism, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
that's the classism and the elitism that I think is that divide, right, in some ways. And you're right. So what happened to those Blacks, right? It's kind of like, Black Lives Matter, but not these particular Blacks, right? And so that was the whole discourse. And so I think when we start talking about Black lives and things that are happening to our bodies and our neighbors' bodies, and I'm saying neighbor, I'm saying like in general, we do have to have some ownership in the church. And so one of the things that I would say is that I think we have to become the leaders that we, vowed that we would be, right? So that when we mount a pulpit or we are engaged in community, that we are being that voice for our sister and our brother, right? That's just basic. But I do think that somehow, in some places, right, the message of prosperity has overtaken the church, and we have put that part above, just basic human need and basic human decency. And sometimes people have tried to align, right, themselves toward a particular agenda that was not necessarily beneficial for our communities. And so I think that's an important conversation as well. And then too, being married to a clergy person, right? I think, every time he gets another appointment, every time he's on the road, and I don't hear from him, for a couple of hours, I am on edge, right? Because of Esther, and and some of you know, like how this church system works. You can be so far in a rural part of, the state, and you're just wondering. Well, I'm wondering, where is he? Is there cell service? Has he been pulled over? So it's almost like not only having the card for your rights, but also that card to say I'm clergy or I'm, this or that. And not that it always would matter, but I do remember back in the day they would have those emblems on the cars, right? To denote that this is a person of clergy. In other words, just leave them alone. And so I'm looking for that to come back because I do worry, and I do have that kind of heightened fear, like that anything at any moment could go wrong. But I do hear you loud and clear about that classism. And then sometimes it's the pain of the past, right? That when people say, let's just get over it, those numbers can't be the real numbers. It can't really be happening the way it's happening. I think sometimes there's a pain that some people may have that reminds them of a situation and circumstance that they just don't want to deal with. I know my family came up, I don't think that long ago, right? But there's a great numerical divide between my youngest aunt and me, of course. But just to hear them talk about the different water fountains, and there's some parcels of what's happening now that they just don't want to talk about because it's so painful. And so rather than unearth that again, sometimes the conversation is just like you said, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think that's a place for them to pivot, and just wish those of us now on the front lines well as we go.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's funny you should bring up that whole about having the clergy on your car, the clergy symbol on your car, because that kind of reminded me of the video we just watched, where that young man said that whenever he was out, he wore his scrubs, and wearing those scrubs, was like a symbol that helped save his life, and that's amazing that 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 we even have to that is how we're treated is based on what we're wearing or what's on our cars, But that's just, I guess
Yeah.
that's the times we live in.
I have a few of those stickers on my vehicles too.
Mhm.
Hopefully it helps get me out of some speeding tickets, but yeah, you
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
but you're right, Hope. I mean, you go into these areas and I've been in a car when we've been pulled over and they may not use the word boy, but they talk to you in such a way that it's like they said it and they didn't say it. So yeah, there are places that you don't want to, that is still happening. And I just really
Yeah.
don't know. We had a conversation today. How can you love the same Jesus that I love? In a
I
ministry
think Dr.
cohort. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then not have a regard for humankind, that I am still part of the human race, and it is sad that we are still having these aches and these anxieties. And it's very you mentioned something about the trauma. I think about, PTSD, we associate it with war, but I mean, this is post-traumatic stress, disorder. I know with the video that was going on recently, I, other than seeing it in the snippets on the news, I did not want to watch the whole video. I did not need to watch the whole video. And I could not, in my mental health, watch the whole video because I already knew how it ended. And so I chose not to, and it's because it's traumatizing.
Now with that being said, let's move on to what's going on with the Rochester Police Department. It's earlier, there was a young man, Daniel Prude, who not so long ago was having a mental health crisis, obviously, and had an encounter with several police officers. And I won't tell the whole story. I think we have a little bit of video. Angela, are we ready for that video? Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Now to that breaking news from Rochester, New York, where tonight the chief of police and several of his top officers have suddenly stepped down. Now it comes as the family of Daniel Prude, who died after being restrained by Rochester police, files a wrongful death lawsuit against the chief, the city, and the officers involved. We get more now from CBS's Jerika Duncan.
We want to make sure that Mr. Prude's death changes how we do policing in this city.
That was Rochester, New York Police Chief Laurent Singletary at a press conference on Sunday. Now, just days after being accused of misleading the mayor of Rochester, he's announced his retirement, releasing this statement. As a man of integrity, I will not sit idly by while outside entities attempt to destroy my character. The events over the past week are an attempt to destroy my character and integrity.
Get on the ground. Get on the ground.
Last Wednesday, police body camera video from March showed Daniel Prude being arrested and restrained by several Rochester police officers. 7 days after that encounter, Prude died. His death was ruled a homicide caused by complications of asphyxia in the setting of physical restraint. The hallucinogenic PCP was listed as a contributing factor.
It feels pretty cold.
Mayor Lovely Warren suspended the 7 officers she says were involved in the arrest. She initially said the police chief told her back in March that Prude's death was being investigated as a drug overdose. Late today, the mayor held a news conference.
Chief Singletary will remain in charge of the department through the end of the month, and I know that he and the officers will fulfill their duties.
Even the deputy chief announced his plans to retire, and the mayor said she expects more officers will follow suit. Protesters will be out for the 7th straight night today, some of them calling this move and news of the chief leaving necessary. Nora?
Jerika Duncan, thank you.
So, given what we just saw and what we know, when we know that the media has kind of taken the ball with this and run with it, we see that the persons involved are were persons who are African Americans, and so what does that for me it kind of creates I don't know, a little bit of a conflict, because I'm expecting and this may not even be fair, but I'm expecting that if you are an African American in a position of authority, you take an oath of office to protect everybody, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. But I would especially expect for you to show a little bit more diligence when something happens to another African American. Now that may seem, I don't know, but I want to get everybody's response to what has happened. Anybody start off?
Dr. Lane, I'm with you. I wish that it could be that way as well. But I think the reality is that we've all seen it's just not that way. And so I know for me, a lot of what has sustained me and helped me to get through as a young adult myself is really just being educated by my mother. My mother made it very clear very, very early on, and I watched her take my kids to the museum a couple of weeks ago. And while she was there at the Nye Museum in Atlanta, there was an exhibit, and the exhibit is about African American history. And while she was at the exhibit, she said that there were only a couple of Black people there as whole. But she said while she was looking at one of the pictures, she told the kids, these are people you don't want to see. And she said that the people that were there were looking at her like, how dare you? How dare you say that? But I think that for us, it's really true that whole skin folk, not always kinfolk, is very real. I think systemic oppression has truly created a system for us where we hate each other. That's what slavery did, you know, light skin versus dark skin. Willie Lynch papers just provided information for everyone to sort of teach us to hate ourselves. And so I think a lot of it truly is just that we don't really have regard for each other as brothers and sisters. We don't really care about another brother or sister. And within our community, as has already been stated, you know, we do have 1%ers. We have 1% of our population of Black folks that are thriving and doing well. And when they look at another brother who's on the street, they're like, okay, why are you there? You could have done everything that I could have. That's not true. You know, they may not have been able to do everything that you have done. They may not have had the same access, and no one gets there by themselves. I think people forget that too. Everyone needs help. And many of us, it didn't take COVID for us to start living in isolated communities. We've been doing that prior to that. Some of it's safety. I mean, there's a host of reasons, but I think it's very troubling. I know I came along when sororities in the 90s were doing so much, and I could not wait to get to college and join a sorority because I saw all that they were doing. They were just helping the community, educating, doing everything. And it is just not that way. We have become so divided. I think a lot of us were just seeking to get to what we consider to be the top and forgot that in order to stay on top, you have to bring each other along and encourage each other. And a lot of us as women, we tear each other down. Men, I hear that men do it as well, you know, so until we get to the point where we truly want to be sisters and brothers and in a village and help, I think it's going to be very challenging to even tackle that because a lot of it is hatred and self-hatred that is taught, a lot of it from the time that we are born, you know, in this country. And it takes a lot of education to change that thought process.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But Dr. White, I also want to say that from my perspective, just because you have a Black mayor, Black police chief, I mean, we can even see that here in Atlanta, does not insulate us from these things happening.
Right.
And one thing that I learned from my 31 years in corporate is that the power construct, they will allow you to have a certain amount of authority, but you really have not penetrated the power construct of our society. We still reside in a city where there is a prominent golf course that we cannot go on. We can't go to Piedmont Driving Club. I mean, they don't allow us to go in. They don't allow us to be members. And decisions are being made there by the movers and shakers of the city. Yeah, okay, they can have the mayor, but when it comes to the power base, we really don't have the power. And so I think, yeah, we had an expectation that if the mayor is in power, and she is an African-American woman, the chief of police is an African-American man, this should have never happened in Rochester. But it does not filter down, and it really doesn't filter up. So nothing really changes other than how it looks to the outside, is my feeling in many cases. They have very little penetratable and impactful lasting change, because systemic racism is just that, it's systemic. And it's not going to go away just because you have a Black mayor, you elect a Black mayor, or you elect somebody gets promoted to police chief. Those cops out there that want to do it, they're still out there because it's part of the system. And the system works even when we look like we're in control. The system is still working against us.
That's right. That's right. And it's amazing that and you're right when you say that this really should have never happened. What happened in Rochester should not have happened. And it's my understanding that a lot of it stemmed from the chief of police misleading the mayor, and so that really, I mean, I can't really say that has to do with. I can't say that it has to do with color. It really has to do with just the sheer unprofessionalism. Because I mean, as a chief of police, your duty, you have a duty to serve and protect, but you also have a duty to operate with a level of integrity. When you're called upon to give such a delicate report to the person that supervises you, in his case was the mayor, then it is incumbent upon you to do your job and to provide the information the way you should have. And so I guess he's saying in his defense he did that, but that's not really what the facts of the case. And so now he's saying, well, I'm going to resign because now they're tearing up my character. Well, when you didn't provide the information that you were supposed to provide, then you kind of set that in motion on yourself. And so, I say it's disturbing, but I feel like, if we want to, if as a culture, we want to advance ourselves and we want the world to know that, that we are strong and we are just as viable as white America is, then I think that we need to operate with a certain level of integrity. And that's not what happened, obviously, in Rochester. And it had nothing to do with it. But if we
I think it mirrors also, Dr. White, what I would see many times in corporate America, because there's so few of us rising to certain levels that when we do rise to that level, we are more focused on maintaining our position than actually using that position to advance others and to impact others. We don't speak out, we don't challenge, we don't push back because, I have made it, and so I'm going to hold on to this. And many times we hold on to it at the expense of our integrity.
Right.
Because the position becomes more important.
And that's the only way that we can pave the way culturally for someone else of our nationality, of our color, of our culture to make it to that level, is that we have to set an example by operating at a level of integrity. And a good example of that, and not that I want to get off into something else, but a good example of that was the presidency of Barack Obama. I will say that I am not a big Obama fan, but I will say, I can say that what President Obama did was set a glowing example of what a president should be, and not so much a president that's a black, or the first black president, or just his blackness. No, but he was a president. He was a real president. He had diplomacy. He is a great politician. He sets an example. And so, I'm not making a statement about his administration, but I'm just saying that, he set an example of what a great president ought to be. And by doing that, he paves the way, just like he paved the way for the first female African-American and Asian vice president candidate. I mean, and hopefully will be, vice president. You pave the way when you operate with the level of integrity. What happened in Rochester sets a poor example of when you have this happening, where you have African-American mayor, African-American police chief, etc., of the worst case scenario that can come about. I'm not going to keep talking. I want you guys to talk. Does anybody else have anything to offer? Because we're going to, go ahead.
Reverend White, I just wanted to say that, sorry, Dr. White, I just wanted to say that, I think for me, something that really frustrates me is the church. I think the church is so frustrating because, I've heard so many preachers, leaders in the church talk about our current president. And when you look at the church has been systemically oppressing people for years. It's almost like a hush-hush thing. I think many denominations looked at the Catholic Church and did this, but forgot that when you're pointing one finger, four are pointing right back at you. And so I know for me, I've even had a pastor tell me, oh, Aly, you have problems with how women are treated in ministry. You should have been here a couple of years ago. There was a bishop that used to fill women up when they went to the altar. So that literally means that as a member, and this person was a leader, you watch that. So you're an accomplice. And so I think a lot of the times, when I speak out about things like this, people will literally isolate me and say, oh, you're just angry, go seek counseling. What? And so I think a lot of it is, I think it's miseducation. I think it's protecting abusers. And I think they're at varying levels. And I think that if we don't cut that off, you cannot protect an abuser, period. I think a lot of us do that. We protect people in various positions that are abusing their power. And instead we look at our current president when, again, these people are doing it at various levels. And I think it's just so sick. And I go back to what the Jewish community says. They say, never forget. I have been to so many sayers. I have been to so many events and activities with the Jewish community as an interfaith council member. And doing that work, I remember sitting at a table one day and a member of the Jewish faith asking me, it was actually a female rabbi. She said, Reverend Aly, don't you think you all could get in here and help us out? And I literally, this is years ago, and I looked at her and I said, what can we do? We're still being killed. And so I think that's a part of it. When there are people that speak up, more often than not, we tear them down. If it's not an agenda that we want pushed, we mute it, we isolate that person, and we quiet them, we hush them, and folks get tired. And I think that's just very real. After you've been shut down so many times, after somebody's told you that there's something wrong with you, and then you look at other people who are being quiet and acquiescing and just going along to get along. I mean, honestly, I'm tired of people that are just going along to get along. I think they're a part of the problem because they are protecting abusers. So I think we just have to really uplift that. I do it with my kids at Bethel all of the time. We talk about peace. For the past couple of months, we were talking about peace because, it doesn't make sense for them to wait until chaos comes into their lives to start talking about and finding ways to find peace. The same for hope. We're on that now. So, I mean, I think there's so much that we do as a community. And I think Black folks, especially, I can't speak for anybody else, but I think Black folks especially, we protect abusers. And it is so sad to me. I know that it comes from our trauma, but I think it's still sad. And I think it has to be lifted up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the church, the denomination that we belong to, has a long history of protecting abusers. So, but that's a whole nother show. But you bring up, the church's response to all of this, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. We can have a whole show on that and talk 2 or 3 hours about it. But the church's response to the things that are happening in our community, it astounds me at times because we're either silent or we're making noise about things. It's like there's a saying in the Bible, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, how do we judge the speck in somebody else's eye when we have a log in our own eye? And so the church is notorious for casting these judgments on cultures, on individuals, on preferences, and at the same time they're remaining silent while people suffer and are being abused. That is just, I mean, that is the nature of the church. I've been very critical, especially with what's going on the education landscape, and because the church has been outstandingly vocal about race relations this year, but not enough is being done in the other areas like health, sexuality, education. Not enough is being done or being. There's no advocacy. There's no activation going on, and so I could talk all night about that. And I'm glad. What were you going to say, Reverend Powers?
I just don't know how you can be a prophetic preacher of the gospel and not be impacted by what's going on. I remember when I was in seminary, and of course I was in the throes of corporate at that time. So, I had one foot here and one foot there. And sometimes I didn't know which one was, whatever. And they would be having these deep conversations, on social justice. And I'm like, oh my God, they're just, this is just too much. And then as I migrated out of the corporate world, I always had that sense of my own being. But as things started happening that we thought we were beyond, I saw my ministry and my messages changing. And I never saw myself as a social justice preacher. And now there isn't a Sunday that I mount the pulpit, as they like to say, that there is not social justice issues in my sermon, that I am not pushing my people to be engaged. And it's hard because they've gotten complacent. Our people have gotten comfortable, and they don't want to come out of their nice homes and their nice environments and basically roll up our sleeves and get dirty, and get down with the least, the lost. And so we have got to be, as leaders, we have got to lead by example. We've got to push, we've got to pull, we got to sometimes be subjected to rejection, ostracized, all of that. But it is for the kingdom that is at hand, not for the kingdom that, everybody worried about the kingdom when they go up there and the streets are paved and go. I'm worried about the streets right here. Because if I don't do something in the streets right here, it don't matter what happens when I get up there.
That's right. That's right.
And so we've got to change our, as your title says, we got to change our perspective.
That's right. That's good. That's right. So given that, since we're on the church's response, just this past Sunday, we had a very controversial and very talked about event to happen at a church here in Atlanta, where the very famous, I guess, I don't know, well, he's famous, this rapper and artist, Kanye West, produced a worship event, a worship service, a worship event, where he actually carried out a scripture in the Bible, and we're gonna show that video now, and so that you can see it, and then we'll talk about our reactions to it. Are you ready for that, Angela?
Yes, I'll pull it up right now.
I think that's him walking on Okay, yes. We're not going to give any free advertising, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, Kanye West produced in his worship service this past Sunday. He produced he took a pericope out of the Bible where Jesus is walking on water, and he just recreated it with his choir. And he had the Reverend Joel Osteen out of Houston, Texas, to do a reflection. And so what I wanted to do in our last few minutes was just to get reaction from, good or bad. What are your reactions? And I'll close out with my own. Anybody?
I'm going to jump in here. I wanted to jump in a couple of places, but I'll jump in here. So one thing about Kanye West service is that he gets the attention of many people. Whether we like it or not, he gets his attention. People will now look for that scripture. People will now look for that gospel because he gets people's attention. And with the music, with the liveliness of it, with the charismatic piece of it, he gets their attention. Do we agree with the theology? Absolutely not. But he does get people's attention and gets them to move in a direction that maybe some of us don't.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Somebody else?
I feel that he's making a mockery of Christianity and a mockery of things that we hold sacred. And I totally am in disagreement with what he's doing and the attention that he's calling to himself amidst all the things that he does, which we pretty much deem as unhealthy. And I agree that he does have this mass following, but he should choose to use his influence, his sphere of influence, especially with young people, in a more positive light, and not what he's doing right now, again, which is bringing a mockery to Christianity. And I just don't think that that's a good use of his time or energy.
Okay, all right.
I think that Kanye West is struggling with a mental health crisis. I think it's really sad that he doesn't have the resources that he needs, or, you know, I think sometimes celebrity status puts you in a different kind of space. And so the majority of the people around you, you're paying them. So, you know, you get what you get with that. Nobody wants to tell you that you're wrong. And so I think that's very sad for him. But I think what he's doing with the presidential election, the 2020 election, I think that is, you know, I almost think it's unforgivable. There's no such thing. I recognize that. But, you know, where we are right now, as far as my political views are in hopes of Biden and Harris. And so with that said, you know, all that he's doing is sort of just muddying the waters. And I think it's unhelpful. So regardless of what his message is, I think what his behavior is doing is unhelpful. And I think that he needs to be held accountable for that. And, you know, Joel Osteen stepping in, I was very surprised by that. You know, I think it's one thing for him to be out there doing it by himself, but for him to have someone that many of us believe and many people may believe have a strong theological understanding and background and all of that, you know, to support that, again, you know, I think we're in another situation where we can't really protect these folks anymore. We have to call it what it is, you know, and that's where I am.
I just say when you combine Kanye West with Joel Osteen, I have issues with Joel Osteen's theology also. You see what you get on Sunday. And I sort of also then put that whole little group and I sit them over in the corner with Herschel Walker and Vernon Jones and all of this, you know, it is just such a disservice for where we are in this country and the traumas that we're going through and the things that need to be addressed, that we deal with such distractions, because I feel like that's what it was, a distraction.
Yeah, I like that I like the way you put that about it being a bit of a distraction.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, and it's really kind of a tragedy that Kanye gets a lot. He does get a great deal of attention from our young people, and our young people are our most valuable commodity right now. And so if you get that, if you are fortunate enough to be able to get that kind of attention of our young people, then I need for that, for whatever you do with that attention, to be productive and constructive for our community at large, not just for African Americans, but, you know, for all young people. And so creatively, if I were to look at it with a creative eye, I'll give him an A+ on the creativity. I think it's a beautiful thing. He's out there with his kids. The choir sounded magnificent. The song, the writing, all of that is great. But I need you to be a little bit more careful about the messaging that comes across when you do that kind of
Well, you know, I'm not a Bible scripture quoter, but I believe there's a scripture somewhere that says, "Woe be it unto you if you lead my people astray." So, you know,
he doesn't understand that he's leading anyone astray.
No, he don't even understand. He doesn't even understand the scripture that he was acting out, probably. So
right. And just like Reverend Roland said, that he's struggling, and we all struggle with our theology, our relationships with God. We all have a struggle where we're trying to balance out what life is showing us versus what we know the Bible is speaking to us, and the Holy Spirit is speaking. All of us are going through that, and so maybe what he the thing about it, someone like Kanye, is that his struggle is just playing out on an international stage, and what is the tragedy is that his struggle is not everybody's struggle, and I would hate to see that struggle to influence anybody, especially a young person, in an adverse or negative way.
Yeah.
Well, given that,
the tragedy is.
Go ahead.
The tragedy is also that he's putting himself on the same level as Jesus. I think that's also part of when I say making a mockery of Christianity, he can't put himself on the same level as Jesus. And I think that when he does things like that, within his sphere of influence, people who don't have a sound theological background, they may actually agree that Kanye is that powerful. And so I think that is also the real tragedy of him trying to place himself at the same level of divinity as Jesus.
And some religions will say that that a man is Jesus, man is God. Some theologies do say that. And so he probably has a hodgepodge of things that's going on in his mind theologically, you see? And so that's when, I guess, that kind of gives more credence to what you're saying about making that mockery.
Well, my ending comment to that, and I know it's sort of like out of context, but a mind is a terrible thing to waste.
My, you are so true. Well, Reverends, thank you. We're at our 1 hour mark. I promised myself that we will be sticking to our 1 hour. A couple of things I want to mention before we close out. Next week's show is going to be on climate change. And we do have a good panel of guests for next week and a lot of information to share. So join us on next week. Visit our website to find out more about our programming. That website again is www.perspectiveson.org. Also, join our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll find out more. Subscribe to our blog. Be a part of our mailing list, and you'll know more about what Perspectives On is doing. In addition to what we do on Thursday nights. With that, I'll say thank you all for listening. A special thanks to Kisa Public Radio. And as we leave you, please remember those famous words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, that whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Good night, everyone. And thank you once again for listening.
Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your